For our table runner today, we're going to need 32 half square triangle blocks. So what I've done is I've cut 4 of one background fabric and 4 of the other, and they are all 5-inch squares. I didn't want to use straight white for this. I do have white charm packs, so if you have white charm pack, feel free to use it. And then I have got 7 different fabrics. I used this one twice for my other half of my half square triangles. And what I'm doing is I'm just taking one of my charm packs in white, or one of my charm squares, and then the other, putting them right on top of each other, and then I'm sewing around, and I did some wonky cutting on some of these. So I'm just going to sew around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to do that to all of these blocks. I'll show you one, and then I will bring you back after I've done the rest of them. Now, the way I like to do this is if your machine has the ability to drop the needle, then go ahead and drop the needle so that whenever you stop sewing, you can turn easily. So there's one done. I'll do one more. What I'm doing is called chain piecing. You can stop a 1/4 inch before you get to the end and just turn there. And then, so that I don't end up with weight, I'll clip this, if I can get my scissors in there, and set it to the side. There is a mark on your presser foot if you look. There's a little line, and that little line is at a 1/4 inch. So if I get this little line that's right here at the edge of my fabric, I can be sure that I'm going to have a 1/4 inch when I turn. I needed to go 1 stitch forward, not 2. And then I can just keep sewing a 1/4 inch. Alright, so we're going to pull that out of there. And I'm going to show you how to cut this. So now that we've got all of our half square triangles sewn, I'm going to cut them all. And we're cutting from seam line to seam line, not corner to corner. I'm just going to finger press them back to the darker side. Now the girl best, we can start laying it out. I need 8 rows of 4. So I'm going to lay mine down. 1, 2. So we are now putting together our table runner. And I've got everything laid out the way I want it. And I'm just going to show you this last couple of rows here. You don't need to watch me do all 12 of them. And I am chain piecing as much as I can. My bobbin's getting low and I'll probably have to change it fairly quickly here. But I've got enough maybe to finish what's on here. So let me just show you. I've got everything laid out in the order that I want it, and I'm just picking it up, putting the pieces together with my fingers, and then I'm sewing my little seam. I've got some up-close footage of this that I will put in for you, but I wanted you to see the overall part of it as well. Alright, so then we take the next two, and I'm just keeping them exactly where they were and sewing them together. Now how I do this so that I don't lose a bunch of edges and corners, and so that I use as little thread as possible, is I'm going to take this next one and put it in here. Then I'm going to take the two that I've already sewn here and snip them apart, open them up, and the one that was first is of course the farthest left, and I'm just finger pressing still. Put this one in here. Those little surgical snips are a godsend. That right back down on there. And here I'm going to have to cut my thread, but that's okay. And I think I just did that one wrong. Nope, I did it right. It's out of pattern with the other stuff, but that's because I need to cut that one. Okay, so now what I've got is I've got the rest of the table runner put together. I have 2 rows here that need to be joined to the table runner. But before I do that, I'm going to put these 2 rows onto here. Just so that I don't lose my place. That is a huge thing for most of us. It's a huge thing for me, we'll put it that way. Because I don't know if I have ADHD or something else, but whenever I've got a big pattern to follow or something that's more than just like 3 or 4 pieces, I can get mixed up pretty simply. So I try to do everything as simply as I possibly can. So that row is on. Then we'll put this row on. The way I'm doing this is I'm taking the first block, matching it up at the corner, and then I'm matching it up right here where the 2 seams come together. And that's all I'm worried about to start with. So when I put it under my needle, I've got everything lined up at my seam allowance. And I'm going to sew those first blocks together so that they match at the seam allowance. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the next block. I'm going to make sure that they match at the seam allowance. Sew them together. Same thing again. Got my thread. Alright. So now that I have all of that together, going to cut off that big dog hair there. I didn't worry about the rest of them because this is such a small project. But I've got one more thing that I need to put on here. Now this is the other end of the runner. And I'm just matching up the block to that seam allowance. Then matching the seam allowances right there, the points. Then I'm going to stop and match up the next one. Snip my threads off here. Okay, so now what I have is 2 halves of my table runner, or close to half. I'm going to take them and I'm going to join it at the last seam. Once again, I'm matching up the first block and that first intersection. And that's all I'm worried about until I get to that first intersection. second intersection and making the seams nest. Third intersection. Making the seams nest. Okay, so now I have my whole table runner put together. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to iron everything, and then I'm going to put some batting in between and a backing on this, and I'm going to quilt it. So I'll bring you back when that's all put together and ready to go. Okay, so we have got, move this out of the way so you guys can see this part. We have got our table runner all sewn together. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and press my table runner. And what I want to do is just literally give it a good press so that all of my seams are laying down. You can see that I didn't cut off my little dog ears back here, none of that. I just sewed it. It's so small that I don't think they're going to interfere with anything. And I'm not ironing, I'm pressing. I'm just barely moving the iron across. And I'm giving a little bit of tension back here whenever I do this, just so that everything stays straight. And I am going to turn it over and press it from the front side. Let me get this side done. And I just want it to be flat and as big as it's going to be, because I'm getting ready to put batting and backing fabric on it. I'm going to quilt this all at once with the batting and the backing, and then I'll do the trimming to it. Okay, so now that that is done, I'm my ironing stuff out of the way, and I'm going to use the top as my measuring device. So we're going to bring over, that's what this purple is for. I'm using this as a replacement for batting because I have it. I may as well use it. quite wide enough. So we'll go the other direction. I know that I could sew two pieces together and get the width I want, but this is literally a scrap piece of fabric. And a pair of scissors. Get out my little grinders. I know that's not how you say it. And I'm making the batting piece a little bit bigger. My husband will be happy to know that I've used the fingers. He bought them for me, I think, before we even got married. And I haven't used them much because they are hard on my hands. All right, so there is my batting piece. And then this is going to be my backing piece. At least I think it's going to be my backing plenty long enough. There's a little stain on it, but it looks like a water stain. So I think it will wash out as soon as I wash my piece, which is good. And I like for the backing fabric to be even bigger than the basting fabric. Not enormously so, but enough that I don't have to worry about if everything is covered on the back or any of that. Anybody who knows me very well or has been around for a while knows that I am not a fan of glitter. So the more of this glitter fabric that I can use up, the happier I will be. We're going to put the gingers back in their little case, back over where they belong. Now, here's the fun part of this. I am going, that doesn't need to be under there. I'm going to spray just a tiny, tiny bit of this khaki spray on the back of my batting. And then I'm going to press it down to the back fabric. Doesn't have to be great amounts of glue. I just want it to stay. And I'm going to flatten it out as I do this so that I don't create wrinkles for myself. Good, a little bit of spray. And flatten out my top piece. guess I could call it my quilt top, even though it's not quilt size. But I'm going to flatten that down on there so everything is all flat and pretty. And then I'm going to bring over this side and do the same. So the batting part of this gets the glue and then gets laid down onto the backing. And then I'll smooth it out. And this isn't instant tack or anything like that. I'm using Aleene's tacky spray, and it will dry fairly quickly. I will be able to sew through it. And I can go ahead and take my pieces apart to pull wrinkles out if I need to. A little more of the tacky spray, just where this goes. And I've still got my iron on. Pull my cutting mat out from underneath here too, because I would like to take just a second with the iron and make sure that all of my glue is dry before I go over to my sewing machine. And I'm just going to set the iron down. It'll still be a little bit tacky, but I don't want to get all this glue on my sewing needle. I'm also just checking one last time to make sure that everything is flat and there's no major wrinkles. And I'm not worried about ironing right on the table because I've got plenty of padding between the iron and the table itself with the quilt top, back, and batting. My iron back on there, and I'm going to turn my iron off. And I want to flip it over and just once again make sure I don't have any wrinkles. Let's see, there was one. Another one. And this stuff is glittery. I don't like glitter. There's a fold line in the fabric, but it's not a wrinkle. The shiny little sparkles are not coming through on the camera, but believe me, this fabric has plenty of sparkle in it. A little bit there. You see the sparkly? It's not a glitch, that is sparkle in this. Okay. So now that I've got everything glue basted together, I'm going to start quilting this. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take you guys back over there to the sewing machine. And I'm probably going to do mostly straight line quilting on this. I'm kind of thinking doing like diagonals through it, following the direction where the diagonal actually goes. I can't remember how the original picture I saw was quilted, so I'm just going to do what I want to do to it. So let's move over there and I will walk you guys through this. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine, and the first thing I'm going to do, because I know that bobbin doesn't have enough thread on it for me to quilt it, is I'm going to change my bobbin. Should only take a couple of seconds. If I don't drop it. And here's a little bonus for you. If you are loading a baby lock jazz too, this is how you put the bobbin in. And even though I'm pretty sure it will pick the thread up without help, I'm still going to do it and help it. Should be a pair of tweezers here. From a straight stitch. And I'm going to lengthen my straight stitch up to about a 4, just because that's how I like to do this. And I'm going to turn my quilt so that I am starting somewhere in the middle. A couple of reasons for that. One is that if I start at the middle and there's any excess, it will push it out towards the side. And secondly, because it secures my fabric and keeps it from moving. And then I don't have to deal with pins. Someone commented the other day that they think I sew slow. I am sorry that you think that. I sew at a pace that seems to work for me. I guess I could sew faster, but I'm here to enjoy this. And I also have arthritis in my shoulder, and this particular angle, if I tried to sew fast, I'm pretty sure I'd get about 2 rows, even on this, and then I would be done sewing for the day. Now, one thing you could do, most batting doesn't require you to sew super close together. I think the smallest I've seen that is a requirement is 4 inches. So you could, honestly, sew every other row on this, and it would be just fine. Just depends on the look that you're going for. You could do a loop-de-loop or a meander, and let me explain while I'm doing this. When I put my hands down here, what I'm doing is I'm putting my hands down and kind of fanning out to the sides. I'm making sure that there are no wrinkles in any part that I can feel. And I don't sew any further than I can spread my hands. So like I wouldn't come all the way down here if this were a longer piece. I would only sew the area that my hands have already checked. Once again, starting up here, and just kind of spreading it with my hands. I'm not trying to distort it. I'm not pulling really hard. I'm just spreading it to make sure that I don't have wrinkles in that area. And if I need to adjust, I just spread again whenever I go to do this. And I'm basically following the seam lines down through here. They may not always meet exactly, but that's what I'm calling myself doing. And you may notice I'm a little shy about getting my fingers up close to the needle. Again, if you've been here a while, I ran a needle through my index finger earlier this year, and boy did that hurt. I'd prefer not to do that again. Now I know that when I do this I'm going to cut right here, but I'm still going to start sewing at the upper edge of that and come down through here. Because I don't want to have to cut it based on where I sewed at. That's not what I want to have to do. So I'm going to continue sewing, and I'll bring you guys back whenever I turn around to do the other side of this. So we have quilted our table runner, and I decided to only do it one direction, otherwise it was going to look like I had literally quilted it to death, and I didn't want to do that. I am going to bring my scissors over here. I have one little wrinkle on the top, so I'm going to release a stitch just to take that wrinkle out. And that will come out with the wash. Now, this table runner I'm making from a picture, and in the picture the end of the table runner went like this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the edge of this particular block, and I'm going to give myself about 1/4 of an inch and make sure it's lined up about the same over on that edge. And that's where I'm going to trim the top edge there. So that's that. I'm going to do the same on this side. It may not be straight anywhere else, but it will be straight there. And the reason for the 1/4 of an inch is so that I have room to put my binding on. And then I'm just going to go straight down the edge here. Thank goodness this is small, because it would be a pain to do it on this little table with a big quilt. Then I'm just going to go straight down the edge of the sides. Don't want to let it fall on the floor, because I don't have the garbage can sitting there right now. And what I'm doing is I'm lining up the 1/4 inch right along the edge of the colored part of the block. I'm trying to leave that there. So I don't cover up the whole block whenever I go to put my binding on here. Isn't going to make a difference to anyone except me. Okay, so our table runner is quilted and it's now trimmed, and then I need to decide on binding for this, and I think think the Believe fabric is going to be my binding. I was kind of thinking that all along, but had to wait until I had the final thing done to really decide. Now, I'm going to use I'm going to use a 2-inch binding on here. So I'm just going to cut myself some 2-inch strips. I think I need 4, so that's what I'm going to go with. I probably only need 3, but I always like to make an extra, just in case. Because that's who I am. I'd rather have too much of it than have to cut another piece while I'm in the middle of putting the binding on. And if I have extra of it left over, that's fine. I don't mind that. I just want to make sure that I've got enough of it to go all the way around. I'll turn our iron back on, and I will go make my little binding strips. And iron them in half. So let me do that real quick. I guess I should show you how, huh? Alright, so let's go sew these binding strips together. And then I'll show you how to turn them into binding strips to actually go around your table runner. Binding strips are pretty easy. I have 2-inch strips here, and I have 4 of them. I'm going to bring strip 1 up here, and it's going to be right side up. Strip 2 I'm going to take, and it's going to be right side down. And you may notice that I've got them overlapping the edge. That's because those are selvage edges, that little white piece, and it has a different weave than the rest of the fabric. I don't want that in my binding strips. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sew at about a 2-stitch length, and I'm going to start at that top corner and sew down to the bottom corner. Then I'll take strip 2. And this one doesn't have selvage ends on it, so I don't have to overlap the edges. I just have to make them so that they make a right angle, and then I need to sew from the top corner to the bottom corner. Then I'm going to put the other end of that right side up. You'll notice I have a selvage edge. I have a selvage edge on one and not on the other. But because the end of my strip is a little crooked, I am going to overlap. And then once again, sew from the top corner to the bottom corner. You're going to clip your threads. And then I want you to see that when you pull your fabric out straight, you get a straight fabric. You have a little angled seam on there, but it's not going to hurt anything. Alright, back to the ironing board. Okay, so we are back over here to the cutting board and the ironing board. And I'm just going to use my rotary cutter really quick to cut off those little triangles. The reason I'm using the rotary cutter is because my scissors are in the other room. Scissors are the better option here because it's faster. If I want to stop recording to go grab a pair of scissors. The height of lazy. She's lazy. Okay. Now, to do our I have too much stuff on my table, always, right? To do our binding, I have to find the right word, right? I am going to simply, because it's a short length of binding, bind one end of it, always all the way from where you're starting at, right? Start it. You can finger press it real quick. Fold it over. Now, if your hands give you problems or this just isn't easy for you, you can make your binding wider. You can make it 2.5 inches. You can make it 3.5, 5.5, whatever you want as far as the width of the binding goes, to put it on your quilt. And then just pull it over further whenever you go to wrap it around. And on a regular quilt, I normally do a 2.5 inch binding, sometimes even a 3. But for this, I'm only going to do a 2 because I don't want a super wide binding. And because the table runner is fairly thin, I mean, you know, I've got fleece as batting instead of regular batting. It should be perfectly fine for me to sew it on the back and then pull it over to the front to machine stitch. I do not hand stitch. My hands won't do it. I can't even cross stitch anymore. So if you have issues with that, one of the easy ways to solve it is to make your binding wider. So then you don't have to worry so much about having the hand strength to pull the binding over to the front. And what you just saw me do was press my seam flat where my two pieces joined, and then just fold it over and iron it. Again, I press the seam flat, fold it over, iron it. And I don't know if these are actually the width of the fabric. They were width of the fabric piece that I had. And if you're just doing straight binding on a straight quilt, just use the straight grain. I've made bias binding before for round things. I prefer to buy it. I've made it with my serger before too. which is sometimes handy for that kind of stuff. Okay, so I've got all of my binding ironed. And then the next thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to show you this over here because I think it's easier for you to see. I'm going to take my binding and I'm going to lay it along one of these long sides. And I'm going to pin. I don't need a sewing machine foot to do that. I'm going to pin about 6 or 8 inches down. You can pretty much go as long as you want. And then I'm going to start sewing. And when I get down here to this first corner, then I'm going to sew off 1/4 inch and turn. And you'll notice I'll have to do that twice. I don't mind doing that, but I do want to show you that I'm just attaching it with my clips and not with pins. Pins are hard for my hands. And we'll go all the way around and do this, but I'm not going to sew this part down. I'm going to start sewing right around where this clip is and then go all the way around, and when I get back here, then we'll talk about how to handle that particular issue. Alright, so at my sewing machine, I'm going to put my quilt under here, and I'm going to put the edge of my presser foot along the edge of my quilt. I've got my binding all the way over to the edge, and I'm just going to start sewing. Now, I didn't start sewing way back there. All of that is still loose, as you can see. And we're just going to sew down here to this first corner. So let's do that. You don't have to pull on the binding. You don't have to push. Just let the sewing machine do its job. I do want to point out that most of these presser feet have a mark that tells you where the 1/4 inch is. It's either got a line, or mine, the 1/4 inch, I've measured it, is, don't do that, is right here where the plate kind of opens up, where there's a front of the wall. So when that gets to the edge of my fabric, then I need to turn my sewing machine and I want to sew off that edge. And I'm going to sew all the way off that edge and cut my thread. Now what I do is I bring my binding up and fold it back, so I get a 45-degree angle there. And then I'm going to have it follow this edge, and I'm going to start sewing right there where the other 1/4 inch seam edge is. I am double checking every once in a while that everything is still coming out to the edge. The backing, the front, all of that. Cut both my threads. I'm folding it back and then coming down straight on the next side. You can backspace at all of these places if you want to. But remember, you're also, or back stitch, but remember that you're also going to come back around and sew the rolled over edge down.